So when I said in the morning, Jovan suggested that I should fill the slot, the empty slot, which was empty at the time. I said, well, there are no problems. I'm unprepared now, and I will be unprepared in the afternoon, so 2 hours will not change anything. Well, that doesn't mean that I'm unprepared to talk about the topic. That just means that I cannot write it down. And there is a reason for that, and you'll learn the reason. So I'll give you a presentation. It is just to give you a structure of the presentation. It is my attempt to interpret one movie, David Lynch's movie, unmade movie, Ronnie Rocket, with the help of Hannah Arendt. So I'm connecting two things that shouldn't be connected. So it just happened that, I think that they have something in common. It became maybe an obsession of mine to connect them, but they clicked in my head in a certain way. So I wrote this paper, or I'm writing this paper, and I created this presentation in a Lynchian way. Well, what does that mean? Lynch has a concept of an artist in which he understands an artist as some sort of a medium who gets ideas from somewhere. And ideas come in fragments, so you don't get the entire paper, you don't get the entire movie, you don't get the entire book. You get a fragment. So I got a fragment, and the fragment was this one. This was the fragment. I started thinking about this paper when I saw this photo, and I saw it around Easter last year when I was visiting my relatives who were at the time American diplomats in Vienna. And I said to ILECS, who is an American diplomat, I said, something terrible is happening in the world. Please check the internet. And he was checking the internet, and he said, this is probably it. And I saw it, and I was immediately shocked with this picture, because this was my vision, not exactly like this one. This was my vision. This is how I imagined the Fatima prophecy. The Fatima prophecy has two parts, and I will read you now both parts. The first one goes like this. Our Lady showed us a great sea of fire, which seemed to be under the earth. Plunged in this fire were demons and souls in human form, like transparent burning embers, all blackened or burnished bronze, floating about in the conflagration. Now raised into the air by the flames that issued from within themselves together with great clouds of smoke, now falling back on every side like sparks in a huge fire, without weight or equilibrium, and amid shrieks and groans of pain and despair, which horrified us and made us tremble with fear. That's the first Fatima prophecy. Obviously, this photo doesn't have anything to do with first Fatima prophecy. That's a vision of hell. So the first Fatima prophecy is the vision of hell, clear hell as it's imagined in religion. Well, this is the third prophecy. So when I saw this picture, I said, well, this is the third prophecy, or part of it, or part of the way in which I imagined it when I read it for the first time, which was 15 years ago. It goes like this. And we saw in an immense life that is God, something similar to how people appear in a mirror when they pass in front of it. A bishop dressed in white. We had the impression that it was the Holy Father. Other bishops, priests, men and women religious going up steep mountain, at the top of which there was a big cross of rough-hewn trunks, as of a cork tree with the bark. Before reaching there, the Holy Father passed through a big city, half in ruins and half trembling with halting fear. Afflicted with pain and sorrow, he prayed for the souls of the corpses he met on his way, having reached the top of the mountain on his knees, at the foot of the big cross, he was killed by a group of soldiers who fired bullets and arrows at him. And in the same way, there died, one after another, the other bishops, priests, men and women, religious, and various lay people of different ranks and positions. Beneath the two arms of the cross, there were two angels, each with a crystal aspersorium in his hand, in which they gathered up the blood of the martyrs, and with it sprinkled the souls that were making their way to God. Well, unsurprisingly, the third Fatima vision was kept secret for decades. It's quite a depressing vision. So when I read it for the first time, this is how I imagined the ruined city and the people following the Pope. And so when I saw the picture, I said, well, I saw it once. It was not a typical déjà vu, but it was almost like that. And then I said, well, I will have to write something about this. And then I read something that I will not going to read you now because I'll run out of time. I read the opening. I will just read you a sentence or two, not to waste too much time. The opening of Ronnie Rocket, so the screenplay which I'm interpreting. I read the opening of the Ronnie Rocket and I realized that there is in Ronnie Rocket the same structure as in Fatima Prophecy. So that was the second part. That was the second part of an idea which started forming in my brain. Ronnie Rocket opens like this. So David Lynch is writing a script, and in a script, you know, he already is writing it as a script. So he starts like this: black, fade in a giant stage. So he moves camera into a giant stage, enormous with black curtains open. The entire stage is filled with a wall of fire, 200 feet high. Within the fire are thousands of souls screaming out silently. Only the roaring of fire. I mean, this is a clear vision of hell. You cannot interpret it in any other way. So the movie opens with the classical vision of hell. The only thing that is different from Fatima Prophecy is that they see it in a classical way as something that happens underneath ground. And David Lynch sees it because he's an artist obsessed with stages. So he sees it on a stage with black curtains, enormous stage with black. But this is hell. And then he continues. There is a dark land where mysteries and confusions abound, where fear and terror fly together in troubled cities of absurdities. Black clouds race over a soot-covered city. There is a darkest night, only a few tiny yellow squares of light in the old buildings and factories. Everything is so dark. Well, when I imagined David Lynch's, I imagined actually Hieronymus Bosch's vision of hell. So this dark city, which is city of horror and terror, was actually in my imagination like Hieronymus Bosch. And then for David Lynch, that is enough. If you have three coincidences, three switches, you know, then there is idea which wants to be presented. And I took it serious. So, you know, it happened completely by accident, you know. So the idea was to interpret David Lynch. And that was the original project. And I did it. I have an interpretation. I will interpret parts of that interpretation to you now. I read it, compare it to other people who were writing on hell, to other movies on hell, to essays on hell, pieces of art on hell. So Lynch was part of Lynch was the original project. However, if you take Lynch seriously, and I do take David Lynch seriously, and I interpret him in a number of ways, including in a political way. So if you take Lynch seriously, then the concept, which you have to take extremely seriously, is his understanding of evil. So I agree with David Foster Wallace, who is a great Lynchian. I agree that David Lynch is fundamentally about evil, and I will conclude, because in a final segment of my paper, of course, I will try to tie up two different understandings of hell. Arendtian understanding of hell, Lynchian understanding, and I'll have to show that it made sense to compare them in the first place. It may be very well absolutely idiotic. So maybe it will not make sense in the end. However, I have a feeling that I have to do it, and I'll do it. So how do I proceed now? I will present you first, in 10 minutes or so, Hannah Arendt's usage of the concept of hell in the origins of totalitarianism. And while doing that, I will, of course, have to mention her understanding of evil in that book. Then I'll stop. I will then present Ronnie Rocket in its most bizarre way and some aspects of it, and then try to compare two different concepts of hell and two different concepts of evil. And I will tell you what I think that I learned from that comparison. So of course that I'm aware that the entire project is absolutely on the verge of being rational. I know that I started it because ideas clicked in a very Lynchian way in my head, but you know, I'm not writing, I'm not making a new movie, so I'm trying to make a relatively coherent paper. So let me start with Hannah Arendt and with two words which are quite important for my paper. So let me just explain the title, because there was immediately a question about the title. The word hellhole doesn't exist in Croatian language, and I think that it doesn't exist in Serbian language either, because they're so close. So we cannot translate the word hellhole in, you know, there are a number of ways which you can say what hellhole is, you know, but there isn't a word. So it's convenient to write a paper in English, because hellhole is a completely normal word which you can use. The word hellhole was important to me because Christopher Ganes, a guy who works for United Nations, said about this event. This is Yarmouk refugee camp, and he was working in Yarmouk refugee camp, who was overrun by ISIL at the time. He said, things were absolutely inhumane in Yarmouk, and Yarmouk was a hellhole, frankly. So he used the word hellhole to explain this. And with the eruption of this intense fighting, things got dramatically worse. Well, where do you go from hellhole? So, you know, that was my title. So when I read the Ganes's comment, and you know, he's a diplomat, so diplomats are careful with words, but the word hellhole became really a standard concept. So when people from United Nations talk about Lesbos, for example, camp in Lesbos, they use now word hellhole as a standard term. So everything actually started with Palestinian refugees, Palestinian refugee camp near Damascus, which was ran over ISIL somewhere around Easter last year. Well, then I decided to revisit, together with David Lynch, to revisit Hannah Arendt's idea of hell. And of course, it is directly related to refugees. So when you think about Hannah Arendt's understanding of hell, she writes about hell on 4 or 5 different occasions, but fundamentally in 3 works. The first one is, of course, The Origins of Totalitarianism. The second one is The Image of Hell, which was written before The Origins, but it's included in The Origins of Totalitarianism. And the third one is essay Religion and Politics, which is partly included in the story of totalitarians in The Origins of Totalitarianism. Hannah Arendt was, as most of you who are philosophers know, was immediately attacked for using the concept of hell And she responded to a reply of Erich Vogelin. She responded to that reply, and he, who is a political scientist, he said, well, Arendt, this is a decent book, but, you know, using a concept of hell, I mean, there's no explanatory value in hell, you know, you're getting emotional, concept of hell is really not the best one if you want to explain what happened in concentration camps and stuff. And Hannah Arendt took his criticism seriously because she was reading him and respecting him. So her reply to that review is actually a piece of work in itself, and it's part of another book. And I'll quote Hannah Arendt. She says, "When I used the image of hell, I didn't mean it allegorically, but literally. It seems rather obvious that men who have lost their faith in paradise will not be able to establish it on earth. But it's not so certain that those who have lost their belief in hell as a place of the hereafter may not be willing and able to establish on earth exact imitation of what people used to believe about hell." The end of quote. So she rejects the criticism and says, well, you know, when you think about the idea of hell in a certain way, that idea or imagination of hell was realized on earth. Well, I then revisited the origins of totalitarianism. And then I read carefully, again, probably for the 10th time in my life, the final part of the book, which is called Total Domination, without the later added chapter on ideology, which is, in my opinion, completely wrong anyway. So the final chapter of the original first edition from 1953, which is called Total Domination. And the word hell appears much more time than the concept of radical evil. So everyone is talking about the concept of radical evil and how she switched from radical evil to the banality of evil. But nobody is writing about hell. And there are just a few, and I was checking because, you know, I'm writing a paper. I was checking literature on interpretations of Hannah Arendt, and everybody is ignoring. Only Dick Bernstein has a chapter in Hannah Arendt and the Jewish Question, which is called Descent into Hell, in which he deals with the concept of hell. So just a few words about the way in which she uses hell, because I think it's quite important, and the way in which she does it makes her understanding comparable to Lynch, in my imagination, of course. So when she writes about hell, she writes about the 3 steps in which hell appeared on earth. When hell appeared on earth, she calls that an event of evil. So hell on earth is an event of evil, and an event of evil is when evil, previously unknown to us, appeared into existence. So a radical evil is a type of evil which appeared only in 2 regimes. That's a Stalinist Russia, not Lenin's Russia, not Khrushchev's Russia, not Putin's Russia. Stalin's Russia. So Gulag produced radical evil, and Auschwitz and extermination produced radical evil. Dachau is not radical evil for Hannah Arendt. That's her extremely provocative interpretation. So she gives us exact years when totalitarianism appeared. So you don't have radical evil under Lenin, because the way in which they eliminated, grouped, killed people belong to lower levels of prosecution. And she tells the story, she says that evil appeared in 3 steps. All 3 steps are somehow related to afterlife. So the first step is Hades. That would be a Greek concept, and a Greek concept of underworld. And she says, and I will quote you because I will read this because this is quite important. Concentration camps can very aptly be divided into 3 types corresponding to the basic Western conceptions of a life after death: Hades, purgatory, and hell. To Hades corresponded those relatively mild forms, one popular even in non-totalitarian countries, for gathering undesirable elements of all sorts, refugees, so refugees are first, stateless persons, the asocial and the unemployed, to get them out of the way, as DP camps, which are nothing other than camps for persons who have become superfluous and bothersome. They have survived the war. This is extremely important for me, and this will be one of my fundamental points. Hades survived the war. So the first step towards hell is not directly related to totalitarian regimes, and it survived the war. That is one of the most fundamental points, so I will argue, of the entire Hannah Arendt's book. And I will read you the concluding sentences of the first edition. So Hades, the first step toward hell, survived the war. Purgatory is represented by the Soviet Union's labor camps, where neglect is combined with chaotic forced labor. Hell is in the most literal sense was embodied by those type of camps perfected by the Nazis, in which the whole life was thoroughly and systematically organized with a view to the greatest possible torment. So, hell appears on earth in 3 steps. This is her point. It appears in 3 steps, and the first one existed before Nazis came into power and will survive after they are destroyed and after they leave the political scene. What is a radical evil? I know that you're all aware of the concept, but just to remind you within the context of my paper. Radical evil, as distinguished from other forms of evil, is for Hannah Arendt a type of evil which is done as if the evildoers wanted to do evil on purpose. So that would be radical evil. This is why she struggled with the concept so much, and this is why Jaspers immediately said, Hannah Arendt, don't use the concept of radical evil. You'll get all sorts of association to Kant's concept of radical evil, and you know, it doesn't make any sense. And there's one other problem. You will make the ordinary murderers, you will turn them into princes of darkness. So the Nazis didn't do evil for the sake of doing evil, and this is what radical evil. This is what radical evil sounds. Hannah Arendt eventually, as you know, accepted Jaspers' criticism and switched to banality of evil and dramatically changed her argument. And lost her theory on totalitarianism, by the way, because if you don't have the concept of radical evil, her theory of totalitarianism is completely gone. However, you know, my presentation is not on totalitarianism and not on problems of Hannah Arendt's teaching in general. It is about the idea of radical evil, that the fundamental aspect of radical evil is that it is non-utilitarian. You cannot give any utilitarian reasons, either political, economical, historical, for that type of evil to be committed. And this is why she wants to call it radical, as if it was done on purpose. But there is one other thing, of course, fundamental for her entire argument, that when she talks about concentration camps, she talks about a phantom world in which they appeared. And she distinguishes a phantom world of the camps from the rest of society. So she has 2 different worlds. She has a phantom world of concentration camps in which radical evil appears, and she explains everything that happens within a camp in a very almost metaphysical way, if you call it, or she gives it almost an ontological status. So when she talks about radical evil, it's like a moral black hole, although she doesn't use my words. So it twists everything around. And then she used Bettelheim and other people. She says, you know, even the guards lost their minds. So even the evildoers, the people who committed evil, got absolutely twisted. So what came out in the end is concentration camp actually became a de facto place in which humanity itself was destroyed. And that's, of course, the most problematic sentence of the entire book, that, you know, the camp is a place where humanity as humanity is destroyed. This is why I call it like a black hole, like anti-morality. So everything like hell on earth. So it is a hole in which something comes into existence that should have never come into existence. However, that what comes into existence didn't exist before. So it's not that hell exists somewhere and we punched the hole in hell. No, we opened it and created something absolutely terrible. The beauty of Hannah Arendt's argument, and this is why I used parts of that argument when I was here 8 years ago, is that the project which opened this space, which she calls event of evil, was done by the entire European civilization. So it's not a collapse of German culture. It's not a result of German culture. It's a collapse of European civilization. That's her argument 50 or more than 50, in 1953. Giorgio Agamben wrote a short essay commenting on Hannah Arendt. 50 years after the original essay was written, it's in 1993. And I read it when I was writing paper on Agamben. I read it a number of years ago when I was writing on Homo Sacer and completely missed it. I revisited it again because I was reading, when refugee crisis started, I revisited, read again We Refugees, and then I read Agamben again. Well, I was quite surprised. So suddenly, Agamben made much more sense than he made in 1993. In this paper, which is also called We Refugees, Agamben says, it would be well not to forget that the first camps in Europe were built as places to control refugees, and that the progression, internment camp, concentration camps, extermination camps, represents a perfectly real filiation. So what is he talking? He's talking about my paper. He's talking about Hannah Arendt's concept of hell. And he's saying in 1993, oh, please don't underestimate the possibility of European civilization to allow everything to happen again. And he says, I quote again, before the extermination camps are reopened in Europe, which is already starting to happen because the war in former Yugoslavia is happening. And so he's thinking about Omarska and trying to, and other camps, but Omarska was the one which started his serious thinking about the region. So he personally was thinking about Omarska. So before the extermination camps are reopened in Europe, which is already starting to happen, nation states must find the courage to call into question the very principle of the inscription of nativity and the trinity of state, nation, territory, which is based on. So if we don't, that's Agamben's argument, if we don't put into question the idea of a nation state, we will not solve the problem. So we have to, and this is what he is arguing, we have to open a completely new paradigm. So the Europeans will have to start thinking about the European people. That's the first thing. So we have to start imagining us Europeans as the European people. If that doesn't happen, it will be impossible for the Poles to be part of the British society. That's one thing. And the other thing is, of course, that if the refugees, and he couldn't dream of a refugee crisis, so he's thinking about something completely different. He's thinking about the way how to rethink the European Union beyond the idea of nation state. Now something completely different and more radical happens, and that what happens is that suddenly we have to deal with an enormous refugee crisis which wasn't mentioned in 1993, and we deal it in a way which reopens Hades. So in order to deal with the refugees, we reopen internment camps all over the place. And Agamben, as you know, his famous argument, he's saying that that's the concept of a camp becoming a global paradigm. So he makes the argument as strong and as, in my opinion, and I wrote a paper on it called Telos of the Camp. As a political science, I think that his argument is incorrect. However, today, he is my ally because he's dramatizing the concept of hell in a most strong possible way. So now we are operating today in a same direction, or I'm following Agamben's interpretation of Hannah Arendt, which is dramatic, but I think it should be dramatic. I wouldn't go with the concept of hell if I didn't think that the concept of hell is useful. Now let me stop and switch to Ronnie Rocket. So Hannah Arendt is hell, radical evil, and two worlds. The one is the world of a normal, the world of ideology and Nazi ideology. The other part is a fictional world, or that phantom world that she calls, in which evil appeared. Well, I think that none of you is familiar with Ronnie Rocket, so you don't know. Most of you know Hannah Arendt and know what she's saying, so I was just going through that stuff, hoping that you're familiar with her fundamental concepts, because most of you are philosophers. Well, you don't know anything about Ronnie Rocket, or most of you don't know anything about Ronnie Rocket. I'll run quickly through the story, which is quite a bizarre one, but then I'll try to interpret it in a relatively reasonable way. So Ronnie Rocket is David Lynch's movie, which David Lynch wanted to make after he made the first one, Eraserhead. But he couldn't get funding for the movie. Well, the reason is very simple. I will read you what the script is about. Nobody wanted to give money for the script. So David Lynch, in the meantime, became one of the most famous directors on planet, and recognized as the greatest living director. He still cannot get the funding for the project. However, it's a brilliant project. So Ronnie Rocket contains two parallel storylines and two protagonists, two heroes, who are both anti-heroes. The first storyline follows Ronnie, who is kidnapped, snatched from a hospital by two unorthodox surgeons. Ronnie is in a terrible shape, and he's about to die. A complete mess, something terrible happened to his body, and he's a midget. He's like a 3-foot big guy. So the doctors save him by surgically implanting an electric device in his chest, which has to be recharged every 15 minutes. So he's a combination of a midget and a Frankenstein's monster. The doctors live in a three-way S&M relationship with a dominant woman who uses electricity as a part of sex play, and she changes them on a nightly basis. So one night she tortures one doctor, the other night she tortures another doctor. Electricity is, of course, fundamental here, so electricity already appears twice. Electricity is something that keeps Ronnie alive. Electricity is used as a part of sex play. They are an unorthodox family, and they want to make Ronnie Rocket their son. So they kidnap a 16-year-old boy in order to complete a family, a bizarre family of a dominant woman with two surgeons, submissive surgeons. Ronnie is about 16 years old, so they enroll him into a high school where he by accident becomes a member of the band and eventually a superstar. The accident is really bizarre because when they plugged him into electricity, he produces a fantastic sound. So when electricity is coming through his body, he's a brilliant singer. And the band immediately takes him, and he becomes a member of the band and eventually a superstar. The other main character is called Detective. And Detective appears in hospital before Ronnie Rocket was kidnapped by two surgeons, so he appears at the beginning of the movie and gets from Ronnie a cryptic information which will be used later in Inner City. And I should have prepared it on PowerPoint. It's just a drawing of a closed circle, open circle, and plus and minus electricity. So the message is again about electricity. And the movie is, of course, about electricity. And he goes then into Inner City, leaves the hospital, goes to Inner City, but the trains cannot take him all the way. And the guy who is in the train says, you know, we cannot go all the way to the inner city because the energy in the inner city is so bad, you have to stop and then you'll have to walk. So we immediately recognize that something is fundamentally wrong with the energy in inner city. The things get really complicated. The story so far is bizarre but looks relatively understandable. So there's a little guy. The little guy gives a message to detective. The detective goes to one part of the city. The guy is kidnapped, lives in another part of the city. So we have a feeling that everything is happening within a city, within the same space, and that everything is okay. But the things get complicated when Ronnie Rocket's manager, who is a greedy bastard, forces Dorothy and two doctors to zip Ronnie with bigger and dangerous amount of electricity so that he can make more money through concerts, which they eventually don't want to do because the bigger amount of electricity can kill Ronnie Rocket. But in the end, they absolutely refuse to zip Ronnie with enormous amounts of electricity, and they get killed. So the manager kills Dorothy and two surgeons who repaired Ronnie Rocket, and this is where the movie really becomes, or the script really becomes bizarre. They appear in the inner city. So dead characters for whom we believed that are part of the same world or a same ontological level actually appear in a different part of the city. And then everything becomes complicated because the inner part of the city can be interpreted in a number of ways. And the way in which I interpret inner city is to interpret it as purgatory, but literally, not purgatory in Hannah Arendt's sense, but purgatory in a religious sense. I will now read you a part from the script, just to give you a taste what the movie was supposed to be about. Because the movie is about, as David Lynch says, it's about electricity. And electricity can be good and bad, which is the fundamental idea of the movie. So the inner city is a place in which bad electricity is produced. And there is a sequence which goes like this. Outside on the street, suddenly, people are running and acting crazy, slobbering, unable to stand, spinning, falling, walking into posts or walls. Dogs whimper and press themselves to the pavement. The knitters begin to walk backwards. A massive black truck with an enormous antennae is rounding the corner. The antenna issues four tremendous electrical sparks, and there is a loud humming and buzzing in the air. People are getting very confused. The electricity gets loud. Suddenly the diners goes crazy. The man to the left of the detective immediately puts his elbows into his soup. The detective is suddenly off his stool with his chin pressed into the center of his cheese sandwich and the counter. Terry Hands wants to go down Terry's throat, and Terry's teeth want to bite his hand. The waitress must be standing on her head because only her legs and feet rise above the counter. Each person in the diner is having his He's having his own personal seizure, from bloody noses to head pounding to tongue swallowing. The detective's eyes are rolling and his chin is flattening his cheese sandwich to the thickness of fine paper. The door to the diner flies open and it comes a large fat man, I think. Yeah. It comes a large man with a wild smiling face. His eyes bug out with each smile. In his arms he holds a box of powdered sugar donuts. In his hand is a nice donut, which he eats all at once. As he chews, he surveys the pandemonium. Behind him, a large gang of black-coated men pour crazily into the diner. They begin zapping people with electricity. The donut man goes over to the detective and leans down, looking him in the eyes. The detective tries to focus on the donut man. The donut man holds up the donut right in front of the detective's face, and he says, "Life is a donut." The donut man laughs uproariously. Outside, in the streets, there are fires burning and electrical sparks in the air. Men, women, and children and animals are running wild. Some are on fire. So evil electricity causes hellish effects. So people get on fire. So in my opinion, this is an explanation or description of hellish situation, or the first level of hell. So the inner world is purgatory. Purgatory is the first part of hell. And Lynch's movie is about hell. What the characters do within the movie is to go to the source of power. The source of power is electricity. The electricity can be good or bad. So the energy, the bad energy, can be produced by evildoers. So what David Lynch is doing, basically, he is artistically presenting Gestalt switch. He has an idea of a switch, of an actual switch, which you can just turn off. When you turn off that switch, that actual switch, the lightness comes in and the situation is dramatically changed. At the end of the movie, everyone dies. Ronnie Rocket dies in one story, detective dies in another story, but while they're dying, they turn on the switch, and with the switch, the bad energy stops and everything is reborn. So you have actually a concept, in my opinion, or this is how I interpret him, and this is how I understand the movie. You have a concept of a revolution as a Gestalt switch. But Gestalt switch, because Lynch doesn't know anything about the concept of a Gestalt, so he imagines it in that way. Now, final concluding comparison of two things which look absolutely different, which have absolutely nothing in common. Just the word hell appear, and even in Lynch, it doesn't appear that often, and he never said that he was doing anything which has to do anything with hell. First, a quotation from David Foster Wallace. David Foster Wallace says, "Characters are not themselves evil in Lynch movies. Evil wears them." This point is worth emphasizing. Lynch's movies are not about monsters, i.e. people whose intrinsic natures are evil, but about the hauntings, about evil as an environment, possibility, force. I absolutely agree with David Foster Wallace's understanding of Lynch's concept of evil, and I think that he got it absolutely correct. So evil is an environment, is a possibility, is a force. Now go back to Hannah Arendt. In We Refugees, Hannah Arendt finishes the text by saying, the Committee of European Peoples went to pieces when and because it allowed its weakest member to be excluded and persecuted. So the fact that the entire Europe contributed to the extermination of the Jews, it's not only the Germans, it's the entire continent, is fundamentally responsible for the appearance of the event of evil. Of course that the event of evil appeared within a certain regime. So, the fundamental thing for me is to try to rethink, together with Agamben, this original idea. And the original idea is that you can behave in a way which allows evil to happen again. And she really means that in a most direct possible way. So I will finish my presentation by reading the way in which Hannah Arendt finished the book, and I'll just tell you 5 points quickly, and that will be it. The danger of the corpse factories and halls of oblivion is that today, with population and homelessness everywhere on the increase, masses of people are continuously rendered superfluous if we continue to think of our world in utilitarian terms. Political, social, and economic events everywhere are in the silent conspiracy with totalitarians' instruments devised for making men superfluous. The implied temptation is well understood by the utilitarian common sense of the masses, who in most countries are too desperate to retain much fear of death. The Nazis and the Bolsheviks can be sure that their factories of annihilation, which demonstrate the swiftest solution to the problem of overpopulation of economically superfluous and socially rootless human masses, are as much of an attraction as a warning. And here is now the final sentence of the first edition, 1953. Totalitarian solutions may well survive the fall of totalitarian regimes in the forms of strong temptations which will come up whenever it seems impossible to alleviate political, social, or economic misery in a manner worthy of man. This is exactly what is happening with refugee crisis in Europe. This is absolutely what is happening with the refugee crisis in Europe. We are not solving it in a manner which is a decent as a continent. So, 5 final points. What did I get? And it's obvious that this is my personal project, my personal obsession. What did I get from the comparison? I interpret Arendt's radical evil in a direction which she wouldn't pursue. So, hellholes, in a way, produce evil, unleash evil, which is not waiting to be unleashed. So, hellholes are punching holes in our moral and political fabric. I interpret Lynch's script first by using a concept of hell, and then, which is not done by anyone, and then I'm using, which is of course a Lynchian scholarship, and I'm using the concept of purgatory in order to make the difference between purgatory and hell. I interpret the end of the movie as a revolutionary gestalt switch, because triangle is literally a switch. So you get from another world into from one world into another world by reimagining everything. In that sense, in a way, I'm following Agamben, because what Agamben is saying is, we'll have to imagine something different in order to solve the problem. I criticize the EU by using Arendt's concept of bystander, turning into a Nazi. So this atmosphere, you know, which exists in a number of European countries, and I'm involved, just a sentence before I finish, I'm involved in a project which is financed by Croatian government. It's a project on hate speech. So part of that project, two young scholars are actually checking the way in which refugees are commented on Facebook, on social media and everything. So there are entire places when people openly, with tens of thousands of people liking their posts, are saying that they should be burned alive. So this is hellfire, you know, coming again, you know. Burn the bloody refugees, burn them alive. That's hate speech. You cannot call it any other way. And that's, you know, of course, that wouldn't be a radical evil per se, of course. But this is just a creation of a phantom world. You know, you're opening it in one good terrorist attack. And we're going that direction. No problems whatsoever. So we are not far away from slipping into a phantom world. You don't need totalitarian regime. You don't need totalitarian. Give us 5 good terrorist attacks with few hundred dead people. And, you know, kill them all. Kill the bloody scum who came to our continent. So we are just one step from one level of hell to another level of hell. And I take it absolutely serious. So that's the second thing. So, you know, we don't have, and the rebirth, I can talk about the rebirth of fascism on all levels, because this is what I do as a political scientist on a daily basis, you know. So that revival of fascism is absolutely stunning. So give us, you know, a few 100,000 of refugees and a good few terrorist attacks, let's say in Germany, you know, and you can really see the hell breaking. And, you know, one other thing. In order to act politically and responsibly, we should realize that we only believe that we believe in human rights. We only believe that a fully functional European Union is possible. So this is already things which we like to believe. I check that on a daily basis with my students. I give them Hitler's 11th chapter of Mein Kampf without saying that it's Hitler, and I sugarcoat it a bit. 50% of my students buy Hitler's argument from 11th chapter of Mein Kampf. That all people are born unequal, and then you tie to Plato's understanding of justice. You know, that the smart one should be on the top. You just drop the anti-Semitic parts of the 11th chapter, and students say, well, this is not that bad. And then I said, well, this is fascism, darlings. You know, this is exactly fascism. So I witnessed, and this would be my final sentence, and this is how I finished. I finished my presentation on Karl Popper's criticism of Plato and the reasons why Popper attacks Plato, because he sees some connection with Plato's justice and Nazism, blah, blah, blah. But I wanted to present this anti-human right position in the best possible way. And I did it, and then I went to my office. The students came out of the auditorium, and I heard them saying, well, I didn't know I was a fascist. That was an absolute bliss. I realized how close we are. You know, how hell is, you know, around the corner. In the same way in which Lynch treats hell as something that is around corner, that's an inner city. So, you know, hell, and now to finish, and this is my last sentence, hell is not other people. You know, we don't have to look for otherness, God knows where. You know, hell is us. That's our potentiality. We already did it, and we can do it again. That's my presentation.